Imagine this. There's a person standing right in front of you. They're alive, but there's no recognition in their eyes. Their behavior has changed. They don't seem to feel pain. Fear doesn't seem to affect them. And maybe they no longer have complete control over their own decisions. They look human, but they don't behave like one. Movies have terrified us with creatures like this. But what if something like this could actually happen to a living person? Could an infection change the brain and behavior so dramatically that someone becomes almost unrecognizable? And that brings us to the terrifying question: could a human actually become a zombie? Let's put the idea to the test of science. What exactly is a zombie? In movies, a zombie is usually a dead body that somehow comes back to life, starts walking, starts running, and spreads the infection by biting other people. But this is where science and fiction take completely different paths. Because once a person dies, getting that body to suddenly function normally again is a huge problem for biology. Muscles need energy to move, the brain needs oxygen, and the nervous system needs constant signals to control the body. After death, the body's cells gradually stop functioning and begin to break down. So if becoming a zombie means you have to die first, then the classic movie zombie is almost impossible. But what if you didn't have to die to become a zombie? That's where things get much more interesting. Imagine a person who is still alive. Their heart is beating, their body is functioning, but some biological process starts changing the way they think, react, and behave. Could that create something we might call a living zombie? To answer that question, we don't need to start with humans. We need to look at nature. Nature has already given us a strange example. Deep in a forest, a normal ant is searching for food for its colony. Everything seems completely normal, until suddenly, its behavior starts to change. It begins to leave the colony. It moves toward a very specific location, and eventually, it climbs onto a leaf or plant stem and clamps down with its jaws. Then it stops, and after some time, the ant dies. So what made this tiny insect suddenly behave this way? One possible answer is a fungus called Ophiocordyceps. The fungus grows inside the ant and can influence its behavior, helping drive it toward conditions that are more favorable for the fungus. After the ant dies, the fungus uses the body to continue its life cycle and spread. Think about how strange that is. The ant has its own nervous system. It responds to its environment. It normally controls its own behavior. Yet another organism can influence that behavior in a way that benefits itself. In other words, nature has already shown us that one living organism can alter another organism's behavior through a biological process. But is this phenomenon limited to insects? If nature can influence the behavior of a tiny ant, could something similar happen in another animal? To find out, we need to look at a very different creature, the rat. A parasite that can change fear. Imagine a rat suddenly comes face to face with a cat. To the rat, that cat is a predator. So what should its natural instinct tell it to do? Run. But there's a parasite that can interfere with that natural response. Its name is Toxoplasma Gondii. Studies have found that infected rats can show changes in their normal fear response to cats. In other words, the very predator a rat should be trying to avoid may no longer trigger the same level of fear. And that can benefit the parasite, because cats play an important role in its life cycle. Now think about what we've seen so far. A fungus can influence an ant's behavior. A parasite can alter a rat's fear response. So naturally, another question comes up. If biological organisms can influence animal behavior, how protected is our own behavior? And to answer that, we have to look at the most complex system of all, the human brain. The human brain, the control center of behavior. Everything we do, feeling fear, getting angry, recognizing danger, being attracted to something, or stopping ourselves from acting on an impulse, is influenced by the incredibly complex network of the brain and nervous system. Our brain contains billions of neurons constantly sending and receiving signals. So if a disease or biological agent disrupts these systems, our behavior can change too. Our fear response could change. Impulse control could become weaker. aggression could increase, and decision-making could be affected. But there's one very important distinction we need to make. Changing someone's behavior is not the same as controlling them like a remote-controlled machine. Nature gives us examples of behavior manipulation, but the human brain is far more complex. So, is there a real disease that can dramatically affect the brain and behavior in humans? Yes, and that brings us to a disease that is often mentioned whenever people talk about the possibility of a real-world zombie. Rabies. Rabies. Why does it resemble the zombie concept? Rabies is a serious disease that affects the nervous system and the brain. In some infected animals, behavior can change dramatically. They may become unusually aggressive, their behavior can become abnormal, and biting can play an important role in how the infection spreads. Now, think about the classic zombie movie for a moment. Aggression, strange behavior, and an infection spreading through bites. The similarities are obvious, but this is where science draws the line. Rabies does not take control of a person's brain and operate them according to some outside organism's commands. Instead, it causes severe dysfunction in the brain and nervous system. And that distinction is extremely important. Damaging the brain is one thing. Perfectly controlling the brain is something completely different. So, scientifically speaking, calling rabies a zombie virus would be misleading. But rabies does show us something important. Some biological infections can have serious effects on the human brain and behavior. And now, our zombie story comes down to two very different possibilities. On one side, the dead zombie, and on the other, the living zombie. So now, let's put both of them to the final test. Test number 1, the dead zombie. So, what would a dead human body actually need to get up and move again? Energy, functioning muscles, working nerves, and a brain capable of sending signals throughout the body. But after death, those biological systems begin to shut down. Cells become damaged, tissues start to break down, and without oxygen, the brain quickly loses its ability to function. So a dead human body walking around for days, running, chasing people, and attacking them is biologically extremely unrealistic. So, what about the classic movie zombie? Almost impossible. But our story isn't over yet, because the second possibility is much more interesting. Number 2, the living zombie. Now imagine the person never died. Their heart is still beating, their muscles are still working, their brain is still functioning. But an infection or some other biological process has dramatically changed the way their brain works. Their fear response has changed. Their impulse control has weakened. Their aggression has increased. And their decision-making has been affected. Now imagine that same biological process could somehow spread from one person to another. From the outside, it might start to look a lot like a zombie outbreak. But could science actually create a human zombie like this? Not with anything we know of today. Because influencing the behavior of an ant or changing a rat's fear response is completely different from manipulating the incredibly complex human brain to the point where someone loses control of their identity and decision-making. The human brain is vastly more complicated. And right now, we have no established biological mechanism capable of turning a person into a movie-style zombie that can be remotely controlled. So, the most scientifically honest answer is, we have no evidence that such a mechanism exists in humans. But that doesn't mean the entire concept of biological behavior manipulation is pure fantasy. Nature has already shown us that one organism can influence the behavior of another. The difference is that when you move from insects and animals to humans, the biological complexity becomes dramatically greater. Final verdict. So, can a human being actually become a zombie? If by zombie you mean a dead person who somehow gets back up and starts walking around, then according to science, that is almost impossible. But if by zombie you mean a living person whose behavior is dramatically altered by some biological process, then the basic idea isn't completely outside the realm of biology. But the human version? Based on what we know today, it's extremely unlikely and extraordinarily complex. And maybe that's what makes the idea of a zombie apocalypse so disturbing, because perhaps the real horror isn't dead bodies rising from their graves. Maybe it's the possibility that a person could still be alive, their body could still be functioning, but some biological process could fundamentally change their behavior. And then we're left with one unsettling question. Would we still call them human, or would we call them a zombie? Nature has already taught us something important. You don't have to kill an organism to change it. Sometimes, changing its behavior is enough. And if you enjoy exploring the strange possibilities hiding between science and fiction, stay with Logic Lab, where we put movie ideas to the test of science. Stay curious.